Bangladesh floods so fiercely that up to 80% of its land disappears underwater every monsoon. Yet somehow, its farmers outproduce entire continents, exporting millions of tons of rice. While the world spent billions engineering crops to survive the water, a handful of families spent 7 generations learning to turn raging floods into floating farmland, using nothing but rotting hyacinth, bamboo poles, and centuries-old know-how. Their method yields triple harvests, 0 emissions, and has inspired aquaponics revolutions across Asia and Africa, but the official story never credited them. Why did policymakers ignore a system quietly feeding millions for 300 years? And what happens to food security when the waters rise even higher? In southern Bangladesh, when the monsoon sweeps across the landscape, entire villages seem to vanish beneath the rising water. On paper, this should spell disaster. Up to 70% of the land can flood in a single season, and yet somehow the region produces enough rice to rank among the world's top exporters. The numbers alone defy logic. 12 million tons of rice leave the country each year, feeding millions at home and abroad. But behind these statistics are families who have spent their lives staring down the water, refusing to let it dictate their fate. In Barisal's low-lying wetlands, a farmer named Abdul Karim stands at the edge of a restless canal, bamboo pole in hand. His family has farmed these waters for 7 generations, passing down a living legacy that never made it into textbooks or government reports. Karim's grandfather and his grandfather before him watched the same monsoon clouds roll in, watched the same fields disappear beneath brown, swirling water. Each year the flood returned. Each year the family found a way to coax food from the chaos. Karim's story is not unique in these parts. In the districts of Barisal, Gopalganj, and Pirojpur, entire communities have built their lives around the rhythm of the floods. In some villages, nearly 9 out of 10 families depend on floating gardens for their survival. These are not high-tech operations, but hand-built rafts made from water hyacinth, an invasive weed that chokes the local rivers. Layer by layer, the plants are stacked until they form a thick, spongy bed. After a week or so, seeds are pressed into the rotting mat, and within days, the first shoots of okra or gourd begin to push through. For Karim, the garden is both a lifeline and a legacy. He learned to build rafts as a boy, balancing on slippery bamboo poles while his father showed him how to twist vines and anchor the floating beds against the current. There were no manuals, no written instructions, just hands-on lessons passed from parent to child season after season. Every year the same questions returned. Would the floods be higher? Would the garden survive? And every year the answer came in the form of a harvest pulled from water that swallowed the land. The world outside these wetlands has often looked at Bangladesh with pity, seeing only disaster and vulnerability. But inside homes like Karim's, the flood is not just a threat. It is the raw material for something remarkable. Here, survival is not about resisting the water, but learning how to farm on it. The real paradox isn't how people endure the floods, but how they've learned to thrive because of them. Building a floating garden begins with the most unlikely material, water hyacinth. In the wetlands of Barisal, Gopalganj, and Pirojpur, farmers gather this fast-growing weed by the boatload, piling it into long, thick mats. Each raft stretches anywhere from 10 to 60 meters long, held together by the tangled roots of the hyacinth and strengthened with sturdy bamboo poles driven into the mud below. These poles keep the raft from drifting in the current, even when the water rises or the wind picks up. The process is as much timing as technique. Once the first layer of hyacinth is set, more are added over several days. Farmers often mix in other plant matter, duckweed, rice straw, and even bits of cow dung to boost nutrients. After 8 to 10 days, the lower layers begin to decompose, turning the raft into a living, spongy bed rich in natural fertilizer. Only then are seeds pressed into the top where the warmth and moisture trigger rapid growth. Okra, gourds, spinach, turmeric, and eggplant are favorites, chosen for their ability to thrive in the wet season's heat. Unlike conventional fields, these floating gardens need no irrigation. Rain and river water seep through the raft, keeping the roots moist. There is no need for chemical fertilizers or pesticides. The decomposing plants feed the crops, and the constant movement of water discourages pests. The rafts rise and fall with the floodwaters. always staying just above the surface, immune to drought or deluge. The rhythm of cultivation is relentless but rewarding. A single raft can produce 2 to 3 harvests in one monsoon season, far outpacing the single annual crop of a traditional rice paddy. When the rains end and the waters recede, farmers break apart the old rafts, spreading the rich compost across dry season plots to boost the next round of vegetables. In some years, families repeat the process 3 times, coaxing life from waterlogged land that would otherwise yield nothing. Efficiency is not just a matter of survival, it is a quiet revolution. Floating gardens require no expensive equipment, no outside inputs, and leave 0 carbon emissions. The technique has begun to travel far beyond Bangladesh, inspiring experimental aquaponics projects in at least 15 countries. From the wetlands of Cambodia to the floodplains of Nigeria, the simple genius of hyacinth and bamboo is reshaping ideas about what is possible in the world's most challenging environments. In the shadow of billion-dollar engineering schemes, these hand-built rafts prove that the deadliest floodwaters can become a force for abundance. The real secret lies not in fighting the floods, but in letting the water do the work. Long before Bangladesh became a nation, the British Empire set out to control the land and water of Bengal. In 1793, the Permanent Settlement Act locked farmers into rigid property taxes, rewarding those who could prove permanent dry land under cultivation. Floating gardens, by their very nature, slipped through the cracks, impossible to tax, ignored by revenue collectors, and left out of official records. As the colonial government pushed for cash crops like jute and tea, wetlands were drained or walled off by embankments, and the skills needed to farm on water were quietly sidelined. Old men in villages along the Meghna still recall stories passed down from their fathers, how the embankment schemes of the 19th and early 20th centuries tried to force the land into a shape it would never hold. When the rains came, the water always found its way back, flooding the fields and swallowing the new boundaries. The state responded with more projects, more concrete, but the floating gardens kept drifting just out of sight, surviving on the fringes. After independence in 1971, a new kind of promise arrived. International aid agencies and government planners swept in with the language of progress. The solution, they said, was high-yield rice, chemical fertilizer, and irrigation canals, tools of the Green Revolution. In the 1970s and 80s, vast sums were spent on projects like the Tista Barrage, designed to feed water into thirsty paddy fields. But the monsoon floods did not respect these blueprints. Each year, silt clogged the canals and water pooled in the same old lowlands, leaving expensive infrastructure stranded and farmers waiting for help that rarely came. While officials in Dhaka praised the promise of modernity, families in the wetlands kept building their rafts by hand. There were no extension officers teaching DAP cultivation, no government pamphlets written in Bengali or English about the art of layering hyacinth and bamboo. Knowledge passed from mouth to ear, from calloused hands to eager apprentices, while the official story focused on imported seed and concrete embankments. In the shadow of these grand plans, the quiet persistence of floating gardens revealed a different kind of expertise, one that thrived not in spite of the floods, but because of them. Every monsoon, as the rivers rose and the fields disappeared, the failure of top-down solutions became impossible to ignore. The floating gardens kept producing vegetables season after season while the new rice paddies drowned. For the elders, each harvest was a quiet rebuke to those who believed that progress could be delivered from above, or that the wisdom of the wetlands could be replaced by imported technology. For decades, international donors funneled billions of dollars into Bangladesh's agricultural sector, determined to engineer a way out of the country's relentless floods. The World Bank, the United Nations, and a parade of aid agencies backed sprawling irrigation networks, high-yield seed programs, and chemical subsidies. Project budgets soared, including $1.6 billion for the Tista Barrage and hundreds of millions more for embankments and fertilizer credits. Yet in the southern wetlands, the water kept coming and the expensive solutions struggled to keep pace. Behind the glossy reports, a different story unfolded. In Barisal and Gopalganj, families built floating gardens with nothing more than weeds and bamboo. These rafts produced reliable harvests year after year, quietly outperforming the grand schemes that dominated donor meetings in Dhaka and Geneva. But official statistics rarely mentioned them. The informal nature of DAP cultivation meant it stayed off the books, invisible to policymakers, fixated on concrete and steel. By the early 2000s, the disconnect was glaring. Irrigation canals filled with silt, and high-yield rice varieties failed to survive the deepest floods. Meanwhile, floating gardens expanded arable land by as much as 40% in the wettest districts, supporting up to 90% of local households. Still, The flow of funds favored imported technology over indigenous knowledge. Recognition came late and quietly. In 2015, the Food and Agriculture Organization added Bangladesh's floating gardens to its list of globally important agricultural heritage systems. The move was overdue. For years, development officers like Shafiq Rahman had pushed for attention to the method, only to watch their proposals sidelined in favor of high-profile pilot projects. Every year, Rahman recalls, we saw the same cycle: money for machinery, nothing for the people who already knew how to farm the floods. The incentive structure was clear. Large-scale projects meant contracts, visibility, and measurable outputs. Smallholder ingenuity passed down through families did not fit the model. Even as evidence mounted that hap cultivation could feed millions without a single diesel pump or bag of fertilizer, the system remained a footnote in donor briefings. Only when international agencies ran out of new blueprints did they turn to the old wisdom thriving in the wetlands. By then, billions had already been spent chasing solutions that floated just out of sight. The true scale of floating garden farming in Bangladesh hides in plain sight. In the wetlands of Barisal, Gopalganj, and Pirajpur, the numbers are staggering. In some villages, as many as 90% of families build and maintain these rafts each monsoon. The footprint stretches across thousands of hectares, but the work rarely appears in government reports or official statistics. Instead, it moves through informal channels. Vegetables are grown on water, sold at dawn in local markets, traded from boat to boat, and carried to distant towns by bicycle or by launch. There is no central registry, no tax records, no line item in the national budget. Yet, for the people who depend on these floating farms, the economic impact is undeniable. Researchers estimate that the floating garden economy quietly supports tens of thousands of households, weaving a shadow market that official numbers struggle to capture. The value of the vegetables and spices grown on these rafts rivals the output of some of the country's largest government-backed agricultural projects. In a single season, a family raft can yield multiple crops, including okra, gourd, spinach, and turmeric, feeding both the household and the marketplace. The Ministry of Agriculture has trained hundreds of farmers in over 50 sites, but the vast majority learned from neighbors, not extension officers. Satellite imagery offers the first real glimpse of the scale. From above, the wetlands are dotted with long, dark strips, rafts anchored in flooded fields, invisible to anyone passing on the main road. These floating beds expand the area of usable farmland by up to 40% in the wettest districts. The sheer number of rafts, multiplied across the southern floodplains, hints at an agricultural system operating on a magnitude that even seasoned economists have missed. The floating gardens of Bangladesh are not a relic of the past. They are a living, growing force, quietly reshaping the rural economy from below the waterline. Rising global temperatures are already shifting the boundaries of Bangladesh's wetlands. Climate models predict that by 2040, more than half of the country's southern delta could be underwater for longer stretches each year. In most places, this would spell crisis. Here, it's an opening. The same floods that threaten to swallow villages are expanding the canvas for floating gardens, turning climate risk into agricultural opportunity. As monsoon rains grow heavier and riverbanks dissolve, the reach of hap cultivation grows with them, reclaiming land that would otherwise be written off as lost. The numbers tell their own story. While high-tech solutions demand millions in investment, each floating raft costs almost nothing, just labor, weeds, and bamboo. There is no need for diesel pumps, imported seed, or chemical fertilizer. The carbon footprint is virtually zero. In a world where agriculture accounts for nearly a quarter of global emissions, the low-tech ingenuity of Bangladesh's floating gardens stands out as a blueprint for a wetter, hotter future. International attention is finally catching up. Aid agencies and governments in Southeast Asia and Africa are now studying these ancient systems as models for climate adaptation. Pilot projects in Cambodia, Nigeria, and Bolivia are already underway, guided by the lessons learned from Bangladeshi farmers who have thrived for centuries in the world's most flood-prone landscape. The challenge is not scientific, but political. Funding often flows to glossy infrastructure and patented seeds, while the proven wisdom of smallholders waits for recognition. The future of food security may not lie in laboratories or boardrooms, but in the hands of those who have always lived with water. Bangladesh's floating gardens offer a new kind of promise, not just for survival, but for abundance in a changing climate. While the world races for high-tech fixes, Bangladesh's floating gardens quietly expand, feeding millions, generating $400 million annually, and emitting zero carbon emissions. As climate change floods more land worldwide, these ancient systems offer a proven path forward. The blueprint for future food security may already rest on rafts held by hands the world has too long overlooked. What other answers are hiding in plain sight? Share your thoughts below.